So our next speaker in this session, which deliberately focuses in some considerable detail on the third UN high-level meeting, is Katie Dain, the CEO of the NCD Alliance. Katie's presentation, and in fact her presence here today, is particularly special as far as this forum is concerned, and as far as the Healthy Caribbean Coalition is concerned. For essentially, this is first and foremost, a civil society meeting, albeit, however, with significant involvement and participation of our partners in the region and below. In the view of many persons, one of the significant developments in this entire initiative over the last decade or so globally has been the role of civil society at the global level. And this role has been played to a significant degree by the NCD Alliance. And the individual, perhaps more than any other, who has led that charge is Katie. And Katie, therefore, for me, is a fabulous pleasure to invite you to come and speak to us.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Sir Trevor, for that very kind introduction. And let me first thank Sir Trevor and the Healthy Caribbean Coalition for, I'll bring this down a little bit, not quite as tall as Dr. Ratchley. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, to be at this important meeting, and also to be in Jamaica and the Caribbean as a whole, to really be in the heart and the home of the political response to NCDs over the years. So in terms of my presentation, what I thought I would do is try and pick up some points that haven't necessarily been touched by previous speakers around the high-level meeting. There's obviously a lot to say about the UN high-level meeting, which has already been said. I'll try and pick up some points that we as civil society think of as particularly important. And I'm going to focus particularly on the first and the third points, basically the kind of the backdrop and the context of this third high-level meeting, and then secondly, really focus on, okay, so what is the role of civil society and the opportunities that we have in front of us over the next 4 or 5 months in the lead up to this meeting. As has been said, this is the third. We've been through 2 already, and I think it's fair to say that we have learnt a lot from both of those 2 previous high-level meetings. Firstly, in terms of really trying to kind of drill home why a UN meeting on NCDs is so important. And firstly, it is the fact that it is a kind of global, multilateral process that's really addressing global issues. As you all know, 2011 was actually the only second time that the UN had even addressed a health issue, the first being HIV/AIDS. And now we're seeing more and more health issues going to the UN. But it really does illustrate the importance of these meetings being very much at the political level rather than being at the technical level. And them engaging heads of government, heads of state, and to really try and galvanise consensus on challenges that cross all borders, that transcend all countries, and that we all need to be working together at the international level. So what are some of these lessons that we've learned over the last 2 UN meetings that we have been involved in? I think first and foremost, it's really the process as much as the meeting itself that matters. And some people have called this the kind of the summit effect. The fact that in the lead up, process of galvanising and sensitising governments to NCDs, the process of convening such as these is as important as the actual meeting itself. And so we really need to be thinking about the next 4 months and how we can generate attention and interest in the issues in the lead up to the actual meeting. Secondly, there are people that make a living of actually analysing and understanding why certain summits and UN meetings have more of an impact than others. They're called summitologists, which is interesting. And one of the things that particular summitologists have said in previous times is that trying to get NCDs into surrounding political meetings and summits is really important. And so the fact that the mention of the CARICOM heads of government meeting coming up in July is being kind of already thought of as an opportunity is fantastic. The Commonwealth meeting this week was another opportunity. Didn't quite get the high-level meeting in NCDs as high as we would have liked, But these other surrounding political, particularly regional meetings, I think are really key to getting NCDs onto the agendas, because it almost kind of gets heads of government thinking about it before you actually get to New York. Fourthly, civil society can make a really, really big difference in the negotiations and the lead-up. We've seen this time and time again. When there's really, really challenging negotiations going on in New York, we as civil society play a really important role in pushing the bar, keeping the bar high, and putting pressure on our governments to make the right decisions. And then, fourthly, just to mention the framing. I think the framing of how we're actually talking about NCDs is critical. As Dr. Rattery said earlier, the frame for the 2011 high-level meeting was around the development challenge. I think it's clear that the 2018 high-level meeting, the frame seems to be much more on the kind of multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder opportunity and challenge for NCDs. And I think within that, we as civil society have an important role in really emphasising the key role that civil society has in the response and making sure that that's really meaningful and not just tokenistic. So what's the context? And this is kind of looking at it from a glass half full or a glass half empty approach. Glass half full in terms of the positives of where we are in 2018 is that there has been a huge amount of awareness raising of the scale, the burden, and the actual threat that NCDs pose in our countries. We have moved on in terms of actually getting that awareness at the global level. There can be no doubt about it. Secondly, there's long-standing political leaders in NCDs that we just didn't have in 2009, 2010. So many of them coming from this region, but we're also seeing a huge array of kind of other political leaders stepping up. And you can see that from the WHO High-Level Commission that Dr. Hennis mentioned, with 5 heads of government actually being involved in a commission on NCDs. You just wouldn't have imagined that kind of 15 years ago, I don't think. Thirdly, there's been a real plethora of plans, targets, commitments, which is both an opportunity and a challenge, I think. It's an opportunity because we've got consensus from governments of where we want to go, but it is a bit of a challenge in the sense that there are a huge array of different commitments and targets that have been made by governments, and that can be confusing in terms of particularly the reporting, particularly. Other kind of positives of where we've come, I think one of the big ones is that we have a strong civil society movement. The Healthy Caribbean Coalition is a great example of that in the region, and globally we have really seen civil society kind of moving on from where it was 10 or 15 years ago. And my next slide would show that one of the real progressions in this area that you can see very front and centre in 2017 last year when we held a big global NCD Alliance forum in Sharjah in the UAE, is this real emergence of national and regional NCD alliances, and the Healthy Caribbean Coalition being one that we really uphold as a good practice model for others to really replicate and learn from. We've gone from having 43 national and regional alliances in 2015 to having over 55 national and regional alliances in 2017. So we're really seeing progression there, particularly in terms of coalitions on the ground. My next slide would show that the half glass empty is the kind of negatives and what hasn't changed. And I think it's very, very fair to say that even though we've had a huge amount of political commitment and fine words said at the UN, etc., we haven't seen the traction and the implementation on the ground that we wanted to. And essentially, we are not on track at the moment to be meeting the global NCD targets that all governments have committed to. So fine words at the UN by government, but we're not seeing implementation on the ground. Some of the other kind of challenges in terms of what we haven't seen are things like, I'll just keep talking, it's fine. Things like a really strong focus on, oh, thank you. Let's see if this works. That was that one, with the emergence of national and regional alliances. so from 43 to 55. And then some of the negatives, I've gone through some of these already. Countries really be overwhelmed and paralysed. I think the other challenge that we have in NCDs is that these are essentially, long-term challenges. They're generational issues that you're not going to see quick wins necessarily in a very short space of time. And so there is a sense of kind of political inertia around, oh, yet another UN meeting on NCDs, which we really need to kind of get around in terms of getting heads of government and heads of state there. And one of the kind of ongoing challenges in NCDs that we talked about in Copenhagen the other week through a conference is this really pitiful level of resources going into the issues. Less than 3% of $22 billion of development assistance for health is currently going into NCDs, which is a large third in many low middle income countries. That serious mismatch is something that we're hoping to really address at the high level meeting. And number 5, this really strong interference of multinational companies, particularly the unhealthy commodity industry, big food, big tobacco, big alcohol, really trying to undermine many of the cost-effective interventions that we know work on NCDs. I kind of addressed some of this as well, but just to kind of highlight some of the slow progress that we're seeing, which Dr. Hennes mentioned as well. 138 member states, that's 2/3 of all governments, basically rated very poor or no progress at all in terms of the 4 time-bound commitments. And what this table shows is that, yes, there has been progress in terms of governments having national plans and national targets in place. But I mean, still less than 50% of countries have a national plan or national targets, and they're the very foundational pieces of a national response that we need. So if we're not there yet in terms of the foundations, where are we in terms of the other kind of cost-effective interventions that we know work? We're not where we want to be. And then I'm not going to go into this because Dr. Hennes covered it in terms of what are the details, but I think just to mention a couple of things that are important from a civil society perspective. Firstly, is this focus on multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder responses to NCDs being the theme, and opportunities for us to be really elevating the civil society role in NCD prevention and control. And then finally, just to mention the outcome is really important. What governments have committed to at the high-level meeting is a concise, action-oriented outcome document, which is agreed in advance by consensus through the missions in New York. And this is what we've had in the previous high-level meeting in 2014, but a great opportunity for us to be really trying to get some strong commitments from governments. I'll skip through this one too. Covered. So in a nutshell, what can we expect? I think firstly we can expect, as Dr. Hennes showed in his slide at the timeline, there is a huge amount of different reports and initiatives that are feeding into this high-level meeting that hasn't happened in the past. And this is both an opportunity and a challenge. Yes, an opportunity in terms of a huge amount of new thinking, evidence, rationale, feeding into the UN meeting, but it's a challenge in terms of making sense of it all and making a very clear narrative for governments going into September in New York. Secondly, expect the week of the UN General Assembly, as always, to be crowded, but even more crowded this time round, because we know that we've got a TV UN high-level meeting on the Wednesday, which is a good opportunity for making links between NCDs and TV, followed by the meeting on NCDs on Thursday, along with everything else that happens during the UN General Assembly. It's going to be a crowded space to be both getting media attention, but also political attention for the issues. Also expect limited technical capacity in New York with the missions from a health perspective, which was raised by the previous speaker. This is important, and I think civil society plays a really important role with this in terms of constantly keeping our government missions in New York up to date with what we want in terms of the negotiations, what's the evidence, responding to questions. I think that's really key, and it's been really key in the previous high-level meeting. This one's really, really important. Expect a significant divergence in political ambitions, and perhaps the 2 previous speakers couldn't say as much as perhaps I am as a civil society person able to say. That's probably an understatement. I think the political environment for the high-level meeting in 2018 is really, really difficult. And there's huge divergence of what governments want to get out of it. There's a huge backlash in terms of kind of thinking about this meeting as being an opportunity to create bold, new, ambitious commitments for NCDs. And actually some governments wanting to kind of row back on what's been previously made. So just a bit of a kind of wake-up call of this is going to be a difficult year to be getting strong commitments out, but that's not to say that we shouldn't be pushing. Expect really strong industry lobbying, as we've seen in the previous high-level meetings. No doubt that will be the case. And I think finally, just to say that, this is a one-day meeting. We're not going to be solving all of the world's problems, and we won't be solving all of the NCD problems. But it's a really important global milestone in the response to NCDs. I just want to end by kind of highlighting the key role that civil society can play, and just kind of very quickly, because I realise I'm probably out of time, mentioning 10 specific ways that we see civil society able to make a difference. First and foremost, establishing a kind of compelling narrative of why heads of government and heads of state should even bother to turn up to this high-level meeting. What is the case for them? What's the elevator pitch to be ensuring that all of our heads of government in this room are attending? That's really, really key. Secondly, we as civil society play a unique role in really being able to elevate the human stories of the challenge. Yes, there's loads of evidence. Yes, there's loads of numbers that we all throw around. But throwing in the kind of human stories, the human carnage, the human suffering that these issues cause is what we should really be doing a lot more of in NCDs. Thirdly, obviously the big opportunity and the challenge is to get heads of government and heads of state there. It was mentioned earlier that there are no heads of government and heads of state at the 2014 meeting. We need to make sure that's different this year, otherwise it's setting a really strong precedent that it will always be at that level. Fourthly, really coalesce and unite and stick to a set of very specific priorities for the high-level meeting, and that's why this meeting is so important over the next few days. We really need to unite around some very specific campaign priorities for the high-level meeting. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to get traction. Fifthly, building coalitions, and building coalitions well beyond our usual suspects. The Sustainable Development Goals has really opened the door to be drawing links and to be building partnerships with the environment, with education, with gender equality movements, all sorts of different areas that we should be working with. Number 6, identify champions, and obviously political champions are key and important. But also you've seen so many examples of other health movements like HIV/AIDS really using celebrities to be putting the issues on the map. So really kind of thinking outside the box in terms of the champions. Seventh, maximise our communications channels and platforms that we as civil society are obviously able to do. HCD being a great example of their reach and dissemination of messages out to the region and beyond. Number 8, promote and package the evidence, the solutions and the success stories. And I think that last one is going to be important because yes, there's going to be a general narrative of we haven't done enough, we're not where we want to be in terms of the high-level meeting. But we also need to be celebrating the countries that have moved forward and have done really well in terms of specific areas of the NCD agenda, because that will provide an important momentum and incentivisation for other countries to perhaps do the same. Number 9, we need to, as civil society community particularly, to know the process. And sometimes we know these kind of go in very strange and wonderful directions. But in order to actually make a difference and have an impact, we need to know where those windows of opportunity are for us as civil society. And one important one was mentioned earlier, which is the 5th of July, which will be the UN Civil Society hearing in New York, which will be an opportunity for governments to be hearing from us as civil society of why we think it's important and what we want to see. And then finally, I think it's important to say that we need to be persistent, we need to be tenacious, and we need to keep chipping away, because these things don't change within a day. It takes a long time to actually see a difference. And finally, just to say that fantastic to see this this banner at the top there, because we as NCD at the global level, our contribution to this is that we've launched a campaign which is called Enough. We've had enough of the lack of progress. We've had enough of the lack of access to essential medicines. We've had enough of our children being exposed to unhealthy adverts and food in supermarkets. And so our campaign is all about the rights, the social justice of NCDs. And so we really encourage everybody to be looking at this as an opportunity to be pushing forward our asks for the high-level meeting and using it as almost a kind of banner for everything that goes under that, whether it's at the national or the regional level.